The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as Marcus Thompson pushed his cleaning cart down the pristine hallway of the Navy Special Warfare Command building in Coronado, California. At 58 years old, Marcus had the steady movements of a man who knew his routine by heart. Gray hair peeked from under his maintenance cap, and his weathered hands gripped the cart handle with the same precision he once used for entirely different tools. It was Tuesday morning, and the building buzzed with activity. Officers in crisp uniforms moved with purpose, their conversations filled with acronyms and military jargon that Marcus understood better than any of them realized. He had been the invisible man in these halls for 3 years now, the janitor who cleaned up after meetings that decided the fate of warriors around the world. Admiral James Mitchell stepped out of his office, adjusting his uniform jacket. At 45, Mitchell commanded respect wherever he went. His chest displayed ribbons that told stories of valor and leadership, including the Navy Cross and multiple Bronze Stars. He had earned his position through 2 decades of exemplary service, climbing the ranks through skill, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the SEAL Brotherhood. Mitchell noticed Marcus cleaning the water fountain near the conference room. The Admiral had seen the janitor countless times, but had never really paid attention. Today was different. Maybe it was the way Marcus moved with a certain awareness, or perhaps the fact that Mitchell was in an unusually good mood after a successful training exercise review. "Morning," Mitchell said with a nod as he passed by. Marcus looked up, surprised by the acknowledgement. "Good morning, sir," he replied, his voice carrying a respectful but confident tone that caught Mitchell's attention. The Admiral paused. There was something about the janitor's bearing, the way he stood at attention without seeming to try. "How long have you been working here?" Mitchell asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. 3 years, sir," Marcus answered, continuing to clean, but maintaining eye contact when spoken to. "You prior service?" Mitchell inquired, recognizing something familiar in the man's demeanor. "Yes, sir." "Navy," Marcus replied simply. Mitchell smiled. "Well, thank you for your service, both then and now." He was about to continue walking when a thought struck him. He had been dealing with call sign assignments for new SEAL candidates all morning, and something playful crossed his mind. "You know," Mitchell said, turning back with a grin, "I've been working on call signs all morning." "What would yours be? If you had one, I mean." The question hung in the air like morning mist over the Pacific. Marcus stopped cleaning and straightened up, looking directly at the Admiral. For a moment, something flickered in his brown eyes, something that seemed to recognize the weight of the question. "I do have one, sir," Marcus said quietly. Mitchell chuckled, thinking the janitor was playing along with the joke. "Oh, really? What would that be?" "Lone Eagle," Marcus replied, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. The Admiral's smile remained, but something in Marcus's tone made him pause. "Lone Eagle? That's pretty specific. How'd you come up with that?" Marcus set down his cleaning cloth and looked at the Admiral with an expression that was neither boastful nor apologetic. "I didn't come up with it, sir. It was given to me." The words carried a weight that made Mitchell stop walking entirely. In the SEAL community, call signs weren't jokes or nicknames picked by friends. They were earned through action, given by brothers who had witnessed something extraordinary. The way Marcus said it, with quiet certainty and obvious respect for what it meant, sent the first ripple of realization through the Admiral's mind. "Given to you by whom?" Mitchell asked, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "SEAL Team 6, sir. During Operation Anaconda in Afghanistan, 2002. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. Admiral Mitchell had studied Operation Anaconda extensively. It was one of the largest battles in the early days of the Afghanistan conflict, a brutal mountain warfare engagement that had tested every aspect of American special operations capabilities. He knew the operation had involved multiple SEAL teams, and he knew that several extraordinary acts of valor had occurred during those frozen weeks in the Hindu Kush Mountains. "You were at Anaconda?" Mitchell asked, his casual demeanor shifting to something more intense. "Yes, sir." "To Koorgar and the surrounding ridgelines for 6 days." Mitchell's mind raced. To Koorgar was where some of the most intense fighting had occurred. It was where Navy SEALs had fought against overwhelming odds, where heroes had been made and lives had been lost. The fact that this janitor claimed to have been there was either an elaborate lie or something far more significant? What was your rate? Mitchell asked, using military terminology for job specialty. So 1, sir. Special Operations Petty Officer First Class. Marcus replied without hesitation. Admiral Mitchell felt the ground shift slightly under his feet. So 1 was the rating for Navy SEALs. This wasn't some support personnel or someone stationed nearby during the operation. If Marcus was telling the truth, he had been a full-fledged Navy SEAL in one of the most notorious battles of the early War on Terror. Your unit? Mitchell pressed. DevGru, Gold Squadron. Marcus answered, using the formal designation for what most people called SEAL Team 6. The Admiral's casual Tuesday morning was transforming into something entirely different. DevGru was the most elite of the elite, the unit that handled the most sensitive and dangerous operations. Gold Squadron had a reputation that was legendary even among special operations communities. If this janitor was claiming to have served with them during one of their most famous operations, then either he was delusional or Admiral Mitchell was standing in front of someone whose service record would be extraordinary. Marcus, right? Mitchell said, his voice now carrying the tone he used when dealing with classified matters. Yes, sir. Marcus Thompson. Marcus, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you telling me you served as a Navy SEAL with DevGru during Operation Anaconda? Marcus met the Admiral's gaze without flinching. Yes, sir. From March 2nd to March 18th, 2002. 6 days on the mountain, 12 days of follow-up operations. The specificity of the dates, the casual way he mentioned details that weren't common knowledge, the complete lack of boasting or embellishment in his tone all pointed to something that made Admiral Mitchell's pulse quicken. Either he was witnessing an elaborate deception, or he had just discovered that one of the most decorated units in Navy SEAL history had a veteran working as a janitor in the very building where their legacy was celebrated. Stay right here, Mitchell said firmly. Don't go anywhere. I need to make a phone call. As the Admiral walked quickly toward his office, his mind was spinning with possibilities. If Marcus Thompson was who he claimed to be, then this conversation had just become one of the most important of Mitchell's career. But if he wasn't, then the Admiral needed to know how someone had learned enough classified information to convincingly fake such a story. Behind him, Marcus returned to cleaning the water fountain, but his movements had changed. There was something different in his posture now, something that suggested the invisible janitor was beginning to remember what it felt like to be seen. The hallway hummed with its usual activity, but everything had changed. A casual joke about call signs had opened a door that had been closed for over 20 years, and Admiral James Mitchell was about to discover that the most extraordinary story in the building wasn't in any of the classified files in his office. It was pushing a cleaning cart through the halls where Marcus Thompson had worked in anonymity, carrying secrets that even the Admiral couldn't have imagined. In 15 minutes, Admiral Mitchell's understanding of service, sacrifice, and the true meaning of heroism was about to be completely transformed. And Marcus Thompson, who had spent 3 years being invisible, was about to learn that some stories are too important to remain untold. The fluorescent lights continued their familiar hum, but the rhythm of the building had changed. Something significant was beginning to unfold, something that would challenge everything the Admiral thought he knew about the men and women who had served in the shadows of America's most dangerous conflicts. As Marcus cleaned, he wondered if he was ready for what came next. For 3 years, he had found peace in anonymity, in the simple routine of maintaining a building that honored the service he had left behind. But call signs, once earned, never truly disappear. They wait in the silence, ready to emerge when the time is right. Today, apparently, was that time. Admiral Mitchell's office door closed with a soft click that somehow felt as final as a gunshot. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind raced as he accessed the secure database that contained the service records of every Navy SEAL who had ever served. The computer screen glowed with classified information that most officers would never see, and Admiral Mitchell typed Marcus Thompson with fingers that trembled slightly despite his years of experience with sensitive material. The search results loaded slowly, each second stretching like an hour. When the file finally appeared, Admiral Mitchell's breath caught in his throat. There, staring back at him from an official Navy photograph taken 23 years earlier, was the face of the man currently cleaning water fountains in his hallway. Younger, harder, wearing the dress uniform of a Navy SEAL, but unmistakably the same person. The service record was extraordinary. Marcus Thompson had enlisted at 18 and completed basic underwater demolition/SEAL training with Class 198. His scores were in the top 5% of his class, and his psychological evaluation noted exceptional mental resilience and natural leadership capabilities. But it was his operational history that made Admiral Mitchell lean back in his chair and whistle softly. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and participation in classified operations across 4 different theaters. He had earned the Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars for Bronze Stars with V device for Valor, and a Purple Heart. His record showed advancement through the ranks at an accelerated pace, culminating in selection for DevGru and assignment to Gold Squadron. But it was the Operation Anaconda file that made Admiral Mitchell's coffee grow cold as he read. The after-action report, still classified at the highest levels, told a story that explained not just the call sign Lone Eagle, but why Marcus Thompson's name was spoken with reverence among those who knew the true details of what happened on Korgar. On March 4, 2002, during the height of fighting on a mountain, Marcus Thompson's team had been separated from their unit during a Taliban counterattack. Communications were down, extraction was impossible, and enemy forces were converging on their position from 3 directions. The team leader had been wounded, and ammunition was running critically low. According to the classified report, Petty Officer Thompson had volunteered for a reconnaissance mission that everyone, including Thompson himself, understood was likely to be a one-way trip. The mission required someone to move alone through enemy territory to locate and guiding close air support that could save the surrounded SEAL team. For 18 hours, Marcus Thompson had moved through the frozen mountains alone, evading enemy patrols and calling in precision strikes while under direct fire. The report detailed how he had used captured enemy communications equipment to misdirect Taliban forces away from his teammates' position while simultaneously coordinating with American aircraft to provide life-saving support. When extraction helicopters finally reached the team's position 36 hours later, they found Marcus Thompson still awake, still on watch, having slept less than 2 hours in 3 days. His actions had not only saved his team, but had provided intelligence that led to the successful completion of the entire operation. The call sign Lone Eagle had been given to him by his teammates, who witnessed him soar alone through enemy territory with the precision and fearlessness of a raptor protecting its own. The name stuck throughout DevGru, where legends were born and call signs were earned through actions that defied ordinary understanding of courage. Admiral Mitchell continued reading, discovering that Marcus had been awarded the Navy Cross for his actions during Anaconda, though the citation was classified and the ceremony had been private. The medal had been presented by the Secretary of the Navy himself, in a closed ceremony attended only by DevGru leadership and Marcus's teammates. But the file also revealed why Marcus Thompson was now working as a janitor instead of wearing stars on his collar. In 2005, during his 4th deployment to Iraq, Marcus had been severely wounded in an IED explosion that killed 2 of his teammates and left him with traumatic brain injury and severe hearing loss in his left ear. The medical board had determined that while he could function normally in civilian life, he could no longer meet the physical standards required for special operations. The records showed that Marcus had been medically retired with full disability benefits and the rank of Senior Chief Petty Officer. His final fitness report, written by his commanding officer, included a note that Admiral Mitchell read twice. Senior Chief Thompson represents the finest traditions of naval service. His courage, leadership, and dedication to his teammates define what it means to be a Navy SEAL. The Navy's loss is immeasurable. What struck Admiral Mitchell most profoundly was what was in the file. There was no record of Marcus seeking recognition, no attempts to leverage his service record for civilian opportunities, no participation in veteran organizations or military reunions. After leaving the Navy, Marcus Thompson had simply disappeared into civilian life as completely as he had once disappeared into enemy territory. The Admiral closed the file and sat in silence for several minutes. In his 25 years of service, he had met presidents, congressmen, and military leaders whose names were known around the world. But none of them had ever impressed him as much as the quiet man cleaning water fountains in his hallway. Admiral Mitchell stood up, straightened his uniform, and walked back toward the hallway with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As he approached, he saw Marcus exactly where he had left him, working methodically and professionally, treating his current job with the same attention to detail that had once saved lives in the mountains of Afghanistan. "Marcus," Admiral Mitchell called softly. Marcus looked up, and for the first time, the Admiral saw him clearly. Behind the gentle brown eyes was the unmistakable thousand-yard stare of someone who had seen combat, survived it, and carried its weight with dignity. The weathered hands that gripped the cleaning cloth bore small scars that spoke of a life lived on the edge of danger. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his voice respectful but wary. "I owe you an apology," Admiral Mitchell said, his voice carrying a gravity that made nearby officers stop and listen. "I asked you a question about call signs as a joke, and you answered with a truth that I should have recognized immediately." Marcus set down his cloth and stood at attention without seeming to try. "No apology necessary, sir. I understand why you might find it hard to believe. Marcus, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that your answer will remain between us unless you decide otherwise. Why are you working here as a janitor? With your service record, you could have any job you wanted in the defense contractor community, or the government, or anywhere else." For the first time since their conversation began, Marcus smiled. It was a quiet, thoughtful expression that transformed his face and revealed the man he had been before war had marked him. "Admiral, I spent 20 years carrying weapons and secrets and the weight of life and death decisions. When I left the Navy, I wanted a job where I could serve without carrying that weight, where I could help maintain something important without being responsible for anyone's life but my own." He paused, looking around the hallway that honored the service he had given so much of his life to. "This building represents everything I believe in, sir. The men and women who work here are carrying on the mission I can no longer perform. Keeping this place clean, maintaining the environment where they make important decisions. That's my way of still serving. It gives me peace." Admiral Mitchell felt something shift in his understanding of service and sacrifice. Here was a man who had earned the right to demand recognition, to expect special treatment, to leverage his extraordinary record for personal gain. Instead, he had chosen to serve quietly, to find meaning in the simple act of maintaining the place where other warriors planned and trained and prepared to carry on the mission he could no longer perform. "Marcus, I have another question for you," Admiral Mitchell said. "And this one isn't casual. I'm asking as the commanding officer of this facility, and as someone who now understands who I'm talking to." Marcus straightened even more, if that was possible. "Yes, sir. There's a group of young SEAL candidates coming through next week for advanced training. They're good men, but they're still learning what it really means to be part of this brotherhood. Would you consider speaking to them? Not as a janitor, but as Senior Chief Thompson, Navy Cross recipient, veteran of Gold Squadron." The question hung between them like a bridge across 20 years of silence. Marcus had spent 3 years hiding in plain sight, finding healing in anonymity and peace in routine. But Admiral Mitchell was asking him to step back into the light, to share the lessons that could only be learned through experience that few men survived. Marcus looked down at his hands, callous from work, but steady despite everything they had endured. When he looked up again, Admiral Mitchell saw a decision forming in his eyes. "Sir, I'll need to think about that. It's been a long time since I spoke about those days." "Of course," Admiral Mitchell replied. "Take all the time you need. But, Marcus, I want you to know something. Call signs aren't just names. They're reminders of who we are at our best, when everything else is stripped away. You earned yours in the mountains of Afghanistan, and you've honored it every day since, even when no one knew to look for it." The Admiral extended his hand, and Marcus shook it with the firm grip of a man who had never forgotten the importance of trust between warriors. "It's an honor to finally meet you, Senior Chief Thompson, the real you." As Admiral Mitchell walked away, Marcus stood alone in the hallway, holding his cleaning cloth but no longer invisible. Around him, the building hummed with its familiar rhythm, but something fundamental had changed. The past had reached into the present, and Marcus Thompson was being asked to remember not just what he had done, but who he had been. For 3 years, he had found healing in anonymity. Now, standing in the hallway where his service was honored but unknown, Marcus faced a choice that would determine not just his own future, but perhaps the future of young warriors who needed to learn what true courage looked like. The call sign Lone Eagle had been earned in solitude, fighting alone in enemy territory. But the real test of its meaning might come in stepping out of solitude to help others understand what it meant to soar when everything depended on staying airborne. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, but their rhythm seemed different now, keeping time with the heartbeat of a man who was remembering what it felt like to be seen for who he really was. The weight of Admiral Mitchell's request followed Marcus Thompson home that evening like a shadow he couldn't shake. His small apartment in Oceanside was sparse but immaculate, decorated with the kind of military precision that becomes habit after decades of service. No awards hung on the walls, no photographs displayed his service years, nothing that would reveal to visitors that they were in the home of one of America's most decorated warriors. Marcus sat in his worn leather chair, the same one he had bought when he first moved to California after his medical retirement. In the quiet of his living room, with only the distant sound of traffic from Highway 76, he found himself thinking about the young SEALs Admiral Mitchell had mentioned. Somewhere in the training pipeline were men who would soon face the same choices, the same tests, the same moments of absolute truth that had defined Marcus's own service. He reached into the drawer of his small desk and pulled out a wooden box he hadn't opened in 2 years. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, were the medals that told the story of his service. The Navy Cross gleamed in the lamplight, its ribbons still bright despite the years. Next to it lay the Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and Purple Heart, each one representing moments when ordinary men had been asked to do extraordinary things. But it wasn't the medals that made Marcus pause. It was the folded letter beneath them, written in his own hand but never sent. It was addressed to the families of his 2 teammates who had died in the IED explosion that ended his career, the blast that had taken Petty Officer Miguel Santos and Chief Petty Officer David Bulldog Morrison. For 8 years, Marcus had tried to find the words that could somehow explain to their families what their husbands and fathers had meant to him, how their sacrifice had saved not just his life, but the lives of 6 Iraqi children they had been protecting. He had never sent the letters because no words seemed adequate. How do you explain to a widow that her husband died protecting children who weren't his own in a country thousands of miles from home? Because that's what SEALs do. How do you tell children that their father was a hero when they would rather have him home to help with homework and teach them to ride bikes? The memory of that day in Ramadi came flooding back with the clarity that trauma brings, every detail preserved in perfect, painful focus. They had been conducting a humanitarian mission, delivering medical supplies to a civilian clinic that had been treating wounded children. Intelligence had indicated the area was clear, but intelligence was often wrong in Iraq. Marcus could still remember the sound Miguel made when he saw the IED hidden beneath debris in the clinic's courtyard. Not a shout or a warning, but a sharp intake of breath that every SEAL learns to recognize as the moment when everything goes wrong. Miguel had seen it first, had started to turn toward the children playing nearby when a blast lifted all of them into a world of fire and flying concrete. When Marcus regained consciousness, his ears ringing and his vision blurred from the concussion, he had found himself on top of 2 Iraqi children, his body shielding them from the worst of the debris. 20 feet away, Miguel and Bulldog lay motionless, their bodies positioned between the blast and the group of children they had died protecting. The medical team that arrived later said the children lived because 3 Navy SEALs had instinctively placed themselves between the innocent and the danger, even when there wasn't time to think about it. Miguel and Bulldog had made that choice in the split second they had, and Marcus had made it in the moment after the blast when he stayed conscious just long enough to cover the children with his own body. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his medical retirement had come not from seeking glory or pushing limits, but from protecting children who reminded him why the mission mattered. The traumatic brain injury and hearing loss were permanent reminders of a moment when being a SEAL meant being human first. Now, sitting in his quiet apartment, Marcus understood why Admiral Mitchell's request felt so heavy. Speaking to young SEALs wouldn't just mean sharing tactical knowledge or operational experience. It would mean talking about Miguel and Bulldog, about the real cost of service and the weight that comes with wearing the trident. It would mean explaining that being a SEAL wasn't just about surviving impossible odds, but about knowing what was worth dying for. His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. "Hello." Marcus answered cautiously. "Senior Chief Thompson? This is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez. I work with Admiral Mitchell at NAVSBCWAR. I hope I'm not calling too late." Marcus glanced at his watch. It was 8:30, not unreasonably late, but later than he expected official calls. "Not all, ma'am. What can I do for you?" "Sir, Admiral Mitchell asked me to follow up on his conversation with you today. I wanted to provide some additional context about the training class he mentioned, if you're still considering his request." The formal tone couldn't hide the genuine respect in her voice, and Marcus found himself curious about what Admiral Mitchell had shared with his staff. "I'm listening," Marcus said. "Sir, this particular group of candidates is special. They're all experienced operators, but they're being prepared for deployment to Syria to train local forces. The mission profile is almost identical to what Gold Squadron was doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Admiral believes your experience could help them understand the human element of those operations in ways that classroom instruction can't provide." Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Training foreign forces was some of the most difficult and dangerous work SEALs could do. It required not just tactical expertise, but cultural sensitivity, patience, and the ability to build trust with people who had every reason to be suspicious of American motives. "Ma'am, can I ask why the Admiral thinks I'm the right person for this?" "There are plenty of active duty instructors with recent operational experience." Lieutenant Commander Martinez paused, and Marcus could hear her choosing her words carefully. "Sir, the Admiral shared some details of your service record with the training staff. What impressed us wasn't just your combat experience, but your humanitarian missions. The report from Ramadi mentioned that you had developed innovative techniques for working with local populations, particularly in protecting civilian noncombatants." The mention of Ramadi hit Marcus like a physical blow. That report would have included details about Miguel and Bulldog, about the mission that cost him his career and his teammates their lives. "Ma'am, I appreciate the confidence, but I should mention that my last mission didn't end well. Good men died because of decisions I made as team leader. With respect, sir, good men died because they chose to protect innocent children, and they made that choice because you had trained them to understand that protecting the innocent is what separates us from the enemy. The after-action report makes it clear that your team's actions saved 12 civilian lives, including 6 children under the age of 10. Marcus had never seen that final casualty assessment. After his medical evacuation, he had been too focused on recovery to request operational debriefs. Learning now that their sacrifice had saved 12 lives didn't erase the loss of Miguel and Bulldog, but it provided context he had never had. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Martinez continued, "these new operators need to understand that winning battles isn't just about superior firepower or tactics. It's about earning the trust of people who have been betrayed too many times, about protecting those who can't protect themselves, and about making decisions under pressure that reflect American values, even when no one is watching." Marcus walked to his window, looking out at the lights of Oceanside stretching toward the Pacific. Somewhere out there, young SEALs were training for missions that would test everything they believed about service and sacrifice. They would face the same impossible choices that had defined his own career, and they deserved to learn from someone who had made those choices and lived with the consequences. "Ma'am, if I agreed to do this, what exactly would you want me to talk about?" "Sir, that would be entirely up to you. The Admiral's guidance was simple. Share whatever you think they need to know to come home alive and successful. Whether that's tactical advice, leadership principles, or lessons about working with foreign nationals, we trust your judgment." Marcus thought about Miguel's laugh, about Bulldog's terrible jokes, about the way both men had lit up when they talked about the Iraqi children who had started calling them by name. He thought about the clinic they had been protecting, about the doctors who had continued treating wounded children even when it put them in danger. "How many operators are we talking about?" Marcus asked. 12, sir. All experienced, all volunteers for the Syria mission. They're good men, but they're going into a situation where the operational tempo is high and the margin for error is essentially zero. 12 men, the same size as a reinforced SEAL team. The same number of lives that had been saved in Ramadi because Miguel and Bulldog had chosen to stand between danger and innocence. When would this happen? Marcus asked, already knowing his answer, but needing time to process the commitment he was about to make. Next Friday afternoon, sir. We could arrange for you to observe some of their training earlier in the week if you'd like to get a sense of their capabilities and mindset. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 18 hours alone on a frozen mountain in Afghanistan, the responsibility of calling in fire support while enemy rounds cracked overhead. But this time, the mission wasn't about surviving alone. It was about helping others understand how to survive together. Ma'am, please tell Admiral Mitchell I accept, and please arrange for me to observe their training. If I'm going to help them, I need to understand what they're already learned and what they still need to know. Outstanding, sir. I'll coordinate the details and email you the schedule. Senior Chief Thompson, on behalf of the entire training staff, thank you. These men are lucky to learn from you. After ending the call, Marcus returned to his chair and looked again at the medals in the wooden box. For 3 years, he had hidden from the weight they represented. But Miguel and Bulldog hadn't died so their teammate could hide. They had died so that others might live, and their sacrifice demanded that the lessons learned from their service be passed on. Marcus picked up the unfinished letter to Miguel's wife, Carmen, and after 8 years of searching for the right words, he finally found them. He would tell her about the children who lived because her husband was brave, about the clinic that continued operating because Miguel had shown local doctors what courage looked like, about the young SEALs who would learn from Miguel's example, even though they would never know his name. The call sign Lone Eagle had been earned in solitude, but the real meaning of service was found in community, in the bonds between warriors who trusted each other with their lives, and in the responsibility to pass that trust on to the next generation. Outside his window, the lights of Oceanside twinkled like stars, and Marcus Thompson began planning how to teach young warriors that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for strategic objectives or tactical advantage, but for the simple, profound conviction that some things are worth protecting, no matter the cost. Wednesday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that comes after important decisions have been made. Marcus Thompson stood outside the main training facility at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying himself with the bearing of a man who belonged in this environment. The familiar sounds of military training filled the air, instructors shouting corrections, the rhythmic cadence of running formations, and the sharp crack of small arms fire from the nearby ranges. Lieutenant Commander Martinez met him at the gate, her professional demeanor softened by genuine enthusiasm. Senior Chief Thompson, thank you for coming early. The team is currently running a hostage rescue simulation. I thought you might want to observe before meeting them formally. As they walked toward the training compound, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and assessment that came with evaluating operators. The 12 men Admiral Mitchell had described were not typical SEAL candidates. These were experienced warriors being prepared for one of the most challenging missions in the current operational environment. The simulation was taking place in a mock village designed to replicate the urban environments of Syria. Marcus and Lieutenant Commander Martinez positioned themselves on an observation platform that provided a clear view of the action below. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched 12 operators move through the compound with the fluid precision that marked experienced SEALs. The scenario involved rescuing 3 American aid workers held captive by hostile forces, with the additional complication of civilian noncombatants throughout the area. Marcus immediately recognized the tactical challenge: how to neutralize genuine threats while protecting innocent people who might not understand they were being rescued. Team leader Lieutenant Jake Morrison called for his men to hold position as they identified movement in one of the buildings. Through hand signals, he directed his team to establish overwatch positions while 4-man assault element prepared to breach. Marcus noted the careful coordination, the way each operator knew his role without need for verbal communication. But as the simulation progressed, Marcus saw something that concerned him. The team's movements were technically perfect, their communication flawless, their tactical execution exemplary. However, they approached the civilian role players with a wariness that bordered on suspicion. When a woman playing a local resident approached their position, apparently seeking help, the team's response was to establish a security perimeter and treat her as a potential threat rather than someone they were there to protect. "Stop the exercise," Marcus called down to the instructors. Lieutenant Commander Martinez looked surprised. "Sir, is there a problem?" "Not a problem," Marcus replied, "but I see something we need to address before Friday." The training officer below signaled an end to the simulation, and the 12 operators gathered in the center of the compound for their after-action review. As Marcus descended from the observation platform, he could see the men evaluating his presence with the same professional assessment he had just given them. Lieutenant Morrison approached and saluted smartly. "Sir, Lieutenant Morrison, team leader. We weren't expecting additional evaluators today." "At ease," Marcus replied, returning the salute. "I'm Marcus Thompson. Admiral Mitchell asked me to observe your training and provide some input based on operational experience in Iraq and Afghanistan." Marcus could see the immediate curiosity in their eyes. In the SEAL community, reputation mattered, and they were clearly trying to place him within their understanding of the operational hierarchy. "Sir, what unit were you with?" asked Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, the team's senior enlisted advisor. "Gold Squadron, DevGru," Marcus replied simply. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. In the world of special operations, DevGru represented the pinnacle of achievement, and Gold Squadron's reputation was legendary. The 12 operators straightened slightly, their casual assessment shifting to respectful attention. "Sir, when did you serve with Gold?" Lieutenant Morrison asked, his voice carrying the reverence that DevGru veterans commanded. 2001 to 2005. 3 rotations Iraq, 2 Afghanistan, various other locations that remain classified. Marcus paused, looking at each man individually before continuing. "I watched your simulation, and I want to talk about what I saw. Your tactical execution was flawless. Your communication and coordination were exactly what I'd expect from experienced operators. But there's something we need to discuss about your interaction with civilian populations." He gestured toward the mock village where they had just completed their exercise. "In Syria, you'll be working with local forces who have been fighting for their lives against multiple enemies for over a decade. These are people who have been betrayed by allies, abandoned by friends, and brutalized by enemies. They have every reason to distrust Americans, and no reason to believe that we're different from everyone else who has made them promises." Petty Officer First Class Washington, the team's communications specialist, raised his hand. "Sir, our briefings emphasized operational security and force protection. We were told to treat all locals as potential threats until proven otherwise." Marcus nodded, understanding the logic behind such guidance. Force protection is essential, and healthy skepticism will keep you alive. But if your mission is to train local forces and build cooperative relationships, you can't accomplish that if you treat everyone as the enemy. There has to be a balance between security and trust building. He pointed to the building where the civilian role player had approached them. "When that woman came toward your position seeking help, your team's first instinct was to establish a security perimeter. In a tactical sense, that's correct. But what message did that send to her? What did she learn about American intentions from that interaction?" Chief Rodriguez frowned thoughtfully. "Sir, with respect, in a real combat environment, approach by unknown civilians is one of the most common precursors to attack. IEDs, suicide bombers, intelligence gathering for enemy forces." "Absolutely correct," Marcus agreed. "But consider this. In Syria, you'll be working with people who have children, parents, husbands, and wives living in areas controlled by ISIS, Assad forces, or other hostile groups. Those family members need medical care, food, protection. If the locals you're training believe that approaching American forces will result in being treated as threats, they won't come to you for help. And if they don't come to you for help, you won't get the intelligence you need to protect them or yourself." Marcus walked to the center of the group, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing hard-earned wisdom rather than theoretical knowledge. "In 2004, my team was operating out of Ramadi, training Iraqi police and conducting joint operations against insurgent forces. For the first month, we followed standard force protection protocols. We treated every civilian approach as a potential threat, established security perimeters, kept our distance. We were tactically sound and professionally competent. He paused, looking at each operator in turn. We were also completely ineffective. The Iraqi forces we were training didn't trust us because we clearly didn't trust them. Local civilians avoided us because they learned that approaching Americans meant being treated like criminals. Our intelligence gathering was limited to what we could observe directly, because no one was willing to provide information to people who seemed to view them as enemies. Lieutenant Morrison leaned forward slightly. "Sir, what changed?" One of my teammates, Petty Officer Miguel Santos, made a decision that probably saved our entire mission. There was a local clinic that was treating wounded civilians, including children who had been injured by IEDs and crossfire. Miguel started volunteering at the clinic during his off-duty hours, providing basic medical care and helping with security. Marcus's voice softened as he remembered his fallen teammate. Miguel didn't speak Arabic, and most of the clinic staff didn't speak English. But he learned the names of the children he was treating. He brought medical supplies from our own kit. He played soccer with kids who had lost parents to the violence. And slowly, people started talking to him. Petty Officer Washington asked, "What kind of intelligence did you get?" "Everything," Marcus replied. Locations of IED emplacements, identities of foreign fighters, safe houses, weapons caches, plan attacks. Not because Miguel was interrogating anyone, but because people who trusted him wanted to protect him. They warned him when attacks were planned in areas where he worked. They provided information about threats to the clinic because they knew he cared about protecting the children there. Chief Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Sir, that makes sense in theory, but how do you balance that kind of engagement with force protection? How do you build trust without making yourself vulnerable?" Marcus appreciated the question because it got to the heart of the challenge these operators would face. You don't eliminate vulnerability, Chief. You manage it. Miguel didn't go to the clinic alone or unarmed. We established security protocols that allowed for meaningful engagement while maintaining tactical awareness. The key was demonstrating that we could be both protective and approachable. He gestured toward the mock village. When that role player approached your position, there were ways to maintain security while still showing her that you were there to help rather than control. You could have had one operator engage with her while others maintain overwatch. You could have moved to a position that gave you tactical advantage while allowing for conversation. You could have demonstrated through your actions that you were strong enough to protect her rather than afraid of her. Lieutenant Morrison asked the question that Marcus had been expecting. "Sir, how do you know when someone is genuinely seeking help versus gathering intelligence or setting up an attack?" "You don't," Marcus answered honestly. "That's the reality of this kind of mission. There's always risk, and some of that risk can't be eliminated through tactical measures. But here's what I learned in 4 deployments. People who are planning to hurt you don't usually approach you directly seeking help. They don't bring their children with them. They don't ask questions about medical care or food distribution or safety for their families." Marcus paused, thinking about the clinic in Ramadi and the trust that had been built through small acts of genuine care. The real intelligence threats come from people who are watching you from a distance, learning your patterns, identifying your vulnerabilities. The people who approach you seeking help are usually exactly what they appear to be. People who need help. Petty Officer First Class Chun, the team's medic, raised his hand. "Sir, what happened to Petty Officer Santos? Is he still active duty?" The question Marcus had been dreading, but knew was inevitable. He looked at the 12 operators, seeing in their faces the same dedication and courage that had defined Miguel's service. Miguel was killed in Ramadi in 2005, along with Chief Petty Officer David Morrison, when an IED exploded at the clinic they were protecting. They died shielding Iraqi children from the blast. Their sacrifice saved 12 civilian lives, including 6 children under the age of 10. The silence that followed was the kind that comes when warriors contemplate the ultimate cost of service. These men understood that every mission carried the possibility of such sacrifice, but hearing about specific lives lost made the reality immediate and personal. "Sir," Lieutenant Morrison said quietly, "what's the lesson you want us to take from their sacrifice?" Marcus looked at the young lieutenant, seeing in him the same leadership potential that had marked Miguel's early career. The lesson is that being a SEAL isn't just about being the deadliest person in the room. Sometimes it's about being the most trustworthy. Miguel and Bulldog died because they understood that our mission wasn't just to eliminate threats, but to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. They built relationships that saved lives, including their own teammates' lives, because they were willing to take calculated risks in service of something larger than their own survival. Marcus gestured toward the training facility around them. You're being prepared for a mission where tactical excellence is essential, but not sufficient. You'll need to build trust with people who have been betrayed too many times. You'll need to demonstrate strength while showing compassion. You'll need to be warriors and diplomats, protectors and teachers. Chief Rodriguez asked, "Sir, will you be working with us through our remaining training cycle? Admiral Mitchell has asked me to speak to you on Friday about leadership and operational decision-making. But based on what I've seen today, I think we need to spend more time on the human element of your mission. If you're willing, I'd like to work with your training staff to develop some scenarios that will help you practice the balance between security and engagement." The enthusiasm in their response was immediate and unanimous. These were professional warriors who understood that learning from experienced operators could mean the difference between mission success and failure, between coming home and becoming casualties. As the group began to disperse, Lieutenant Morrison approached Marcus privately. "Sir, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. How do you carry the weight of losing teammates? How do you continue the mission when people you care about don't come home?" Marcus looked at the young officer, seeing the same questions that had haunted his own early career. "Lieutenant, you carry it by making sure their sacrifice mattered. Miguel and Bulldog didn't die just to save those children in Ramadi. They died to demonstrate that American warriors fight for something bigger than themselves. Every time you choose to protect someone who can't protect themselves, every time you build trust instead of fear, every time you put the mission and your teammates above your own comfort, you honor their memory." As Marcus walked back toward the main facility, he felt a familiar sense of purpose returning. For 3 years, he had honored Miguel and Bulldog's memory through quiet service and private remembrance. Now he had the opportunity to honor them by helping other warriors understand the true meaning of their sacrifice. The call sign Lone Eagle had been earned in solitude, but the most important lessons about service were learned in community, taught by one generation of warriors to the next, passed on through stories of courage and sacrifice that defined what it meant to be a SEAL. Friday afternoon couldn't come soon enough. Friday afternoon arrived with the golden light that makes Southern California feel like a place where important things happen. Marcus Thompson stood before 12 of America's finest warriors in a classroom that had seen countless briefings, but today felt different. These men had spent the week incorporating his observations into their training, and the results had been remarkable. More importantly, they had begun to understand that their upcoming mission would require them to be more than just tactically proficient operators. Admiral Mitchell sat in the back of the room, having cleared his schedule to hear what Senior Chief Thompson had to say. Word had spread through the command about the Janitor, who turned out to be a Navy Cross recipient, and several other senior officers had quietly joined the audience. But Marcus's attention was focused entirely on the 12 men who would soon deploy to one of the world's most dangerous operational environments. "Before I begin," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak about leadership under fire, "I want you to understand that everything I'm going to share with you came from lessons learned through failure as much as success. The best leaders in the SEAL community aren't the ones who never made mistakes. They're the ones who learn from their mistakes and use those lessons to help others avoid the same failures." Lieutenant Morrison leaned forward slightly. Over the past week, he had developed profound respect for the man who had quietly revolutionized their understanding of their mission. "Sir, Admiral Mitchell told us that your call sign was Lone Eagle, earned during Operation Anaconda. Can you tell us about the leadership decisions you made during that operation?" Marcus had expected this question, and he had spent considerable time thinking about how to answer it honestly without glorifying actions that had been born from desperation rather than heroism. March 4th, 2002, to Koorgar Mountain, Afghanistan. My team was cut off from our main force during a Taliban counterattack. Communications were down, extraction was impossible, and we had wounded operators who couldn't be moved. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Williams, had taken shrapnel in his leg and was losing blood fast. Marcus paused, remembering the thin air at 10,000 feet and the sound of enemy weapons echoing off the frozen peaks. As the senior petty officer, leadership fell to me. I had 8 healthy operators, 2 wounded, limited ammunition, and enemy forces moving toward our position from 3 directions. Standard doctrine called for establishing a defensive perimeter and waiting for relief forces. But our radio traffic indicated that relief wasn't coming anytime soon. Chief Rodriguez asked, "Sir, what options did you consider?" 3 possibilities, Marcus replied. First, defend in place and hope relief arrived before we were overrun. Second, attempt to move as a group toward friendly lines, which would mean carrying wounded operators across 10 miles of enemy territory. Third, someone could move alone to establish communications and guide in close air support. Petty Officer Washington understood the implications immediately. "Sir, that third option meant someone wasn't coming back." That was the assumption, yes. Moving alone through enemy territory, at night, in freezing conditions, with a mission of calling in danger-close airstrikes while under direct fire. The probability of survival was essentially 0. Lieutenant Morrison asked the question that Marcus knew was coming. "Why did you volunteer for the solo mission instead of ordering someone else to do it?" Marcus looked at each man in the room, seeing in their faces the same sense of responsibility that had defined every significant decision of his career. Because that's what leadership means in the SEAL community. You don't ask your men to do anything you wouldn't do yourself. But more than that, the solo mission required skills that I possessed and experience that some of my teammates lacked. I had done solo reconnaissance before, I knew the equipment, and I had established relationships with the air support units operating in our area. He paused, thinking about the 18 hours that had followed that decision. But the real reason I volunteered was because I knew that if I didn't come back, Chief Williams would recover and lead the team home. If I sent someone else and they didn't come back, the team would still be trapped with wounded operators and no clear path to extraction. Petty Officer Chun, the medic, raised his hand. "Sir, what was it like operating alone for that long under those conditions?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Terrifying, exhausting, and completely focused. When you're alone behind enemy lines, there's no room for self-doubt or hesitation. Every decision is immediate and final. You move, communicate, engage, and adapt based on split-second assessments that you have to get right the first time." He walked to the whiteboard and drew a rough map of the mountain terrain where the operation had taken place. For 18 hours, I moved through Taliban positions, using captured enemy radios to misdirect their search efforts while coordinating with American aircraft to provide precision strikes. The call sign Lone Eagle came from a way I was able to guide aircraft to targets while staying airborne, so to speak, above enemy forces. Admiral Mitchell spoke from the back of the room. "Marcus, tell them about the decision that saved your team." Marcus turned back to his audience, knowing that this part of the story contained the most important leadership lesson he could share. Around hour 15, I intercepted Taliban communications indicating that they had identified my team's position and were planning a coordinated attack from multiple directions. I had 2 choices: continue calling in strikes against enemy positions, or risk everything on one massive airstrike that would eliminate the immediate threat, but would also reveal my exact location to every enemy force in the area. Chief Rodriguez understood the dilemma. "Sir, Option 1 meant your team might survive the immediate attack, but would still be trapped. Option 2 meant saving them, but probably getting yourself killed." Exactly. And there was a third factor: civilians. The Taliban were using a small village as a staging area, and there were non-combatants in the target area. A massive strike would eliminate the military threat, but would also result in civilian casualties. Lieutenant Morrison leaned forward. "What did you decide?" "I spent 3 hours moving closer to the village, identifying which buildings contained enemy fighters and which contained civilians. Then, I called in a series of precision strikes that eliminated the military threat while avoiding civilian casualties. It took longer, required more exposure to enemy fire, and was tactically more dangerous than a single massive strike. Petty Officer Washington asked, "Sir, why take that risk? In a combat situation, wouldn't mission accomplishment take priority over civilian protection?" Marcus had hoped someone would ask this question because it got to the heart of what he wanted these operators to understand about leadership and decision-making. Because we're not just warriors, we're Americans. We don't win by becoming like our enemies. We win by demonstrating that our values are worth fighting for, even when it costs us tactically. He pointed to the map on the whiteboard. That night on a mountain, I learned that real leadership isn't about making the easiest decision or the safest decision. It's about making the right decision, even when it puts you at greater personal risk. Admiral Mitchell stood up and addressed the room. "Gentlemen, what Senior Chief Thompson isn't telling you is that his actions that night not only saved his team, but provided intelligence that led to the successful completion of the entire operation. His precision strikes eliminated key Taliban leadership, while his intelligence gathering identified weapon caches and supply lines that were targeted in follow-up operations." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, the point isn't what I accomplished. The point is what these operators need to understand about leadership under pressure." Lieutenant Morrison asked, "Sir, how do you make those kinds of decisions when you don't have time to analyze all the factors? You fall back on your values." Marcus replied immediately. "When everything is moving fast and the stakes are life and death, you don't have time to develop new ethical frameworks. You rely on the principles that you've internalized through training and experience." He looked around the room at 12 men who would soon face similar decisions. In Syria, you're going to face situations where the tactically correct decision conflicts with a morally correct decision. You'll have opportunities to take shortcuts that might accomplish immediate objectives, but will undermine long-term mission success. You'll be tempted to treat local populations as obstacles rather than the people you're there to protect. Chief Rodriguez asked, "Sir, how do you maintain that moral clarity when you're operating in an environment where the enemy doesn't follow any rules?" "By remembering that we do," Marcus answered. "The moment we start making decisions based on what the enemy does rather than what we believe, we've lost the thing that makes us worth fighting for." Marcus walked back to the center of the room, his voice taking on the intensity that came from sharing lessons learned through blood and sacrifice. "In 2005, my team was protecting a medical clinic in Ramadi. We knew there were insurgent forces planning to attack the clinic, and we had multiple opportunities to eliminate those threats through preemptive strikes. But those strikes would have resulted in civilian casualties, including children who were patients at the clinic." The room was completely silent, understanding that this story would end with the loss Marcus had mentioned earlier in the week. "We chose to defend the clinic rather than attack the insurgent positions. We chose to put ourselves at greater risk in order to protect innocent people. 2 of my teammates, Miguel Santos and David Morrison, died in that choice." Marcus paused, feeling the weight of their sacrifice as clearly as he had 8 years ago. "I've thought about that decision every day since then. I've wondered if there was another way, if I could have found a solution that eliminated the threat without risking my teammates' lives. But I've never doubted that we made the right choice." Lieutenant Morrison spoke quietly. "Sir, how do you know it was the right choice?" "Because 12 people lived," Marcus replied. "Because a clinic that served an entire neighborhood continued operating. Because local doctors learned that American warriors were willing to die protecting Iraqi children. Because the relationships we built through that sacrifice provided intelligence that saved hundreds of other lives in subsequent operations." He looked at each operator individually. Miguel and Bulldog didn't die for tactical objectives or strategic goals. They died for the principle that some things are worth protecting regardless of the cost. That principle is what you'll be fighting for in Syria. Admiral Mitchell stood up again. "Gentlemen, Senior Chief Thompson has given you something more valuable than tactical training or operational experience. He's given you a framework for making decisions when everything depends on getting it right." Marcus nodded toward the Admiral. "Sir, these operators already have the tactical skills and leadership training they need. What I'm hoping they take from this conversation is the understanding that being a SEAL means being trusted with more than just military objectives." Petty Officer Chen raised his hand. "Sir, What advice would you give us for building the kind of relationships you described? How do we earn trust in an environment where everyone has been betrayed? Start small. Marcus answered. Learn people's names. Understand what they're trying to protect. Show them through your actions that you're there to help them accomplish their goals, not to impose American solutions on local problems. He thought about Miguel playing soccer with Iraqi children, about Bulldog teaching English phrases to local doctors. Trust is built through consistency over time. Every interaction either builds or erodes trust. Every decision either demonstrates your values or reveals their absence. The local forces you'll be training are watching to see whether you're just another group of Americans who will make promises and then leave, or whether you're the kind of people who will stand with them when things get difficult. Chief Rodriguez asked, "Sir, what's the most important quality for a leader in that kind of environment?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Humility," he answered finally. "The humility to understand that you don't know everything about the local situation, that the people you're working with have insights you lack, that your way isn't always the best way." He gestured toward the map still drawn on the whiteboard. "On that mountain in Afghanistan, I thought I was the expert on tactics and strategy. But it was a local guide who told me about Taliban communication patterns. It was an Afghan interpreter who identified which buildings contained civilians. I succeeded because I was smart enough to listen to people who knew more than I did." Lieutenant Morrison asked the final question. "Sir, what do you want us to remember when we're deployed and facing the kinds of decisions you described?" Marcus looked around the room one last time, seeing in these 12 operators the same dedication and courage that had defined Miguel and Bulldog service. "Remember that you're not just representing yourselves or even your unit. You're representing every American who believes that freedom is worth fighting for, that innocent people deserve protection, that right matters more than might." He paused, thinking about call signs and the moments when they're earned. Your actions in Syria will either validate or undermine everything America claims to stand for. The local forces you train will judge all Americans based on how you treat them. The civilians you encounter will decide whether American warriors can be trusted based on what they see you do. Marcus walked toward the door, then turned back for his final words. Earn your call signs through actions that honor the best traditions of naval service. Make decisions that you'll be proud to explain to your children someday. Come home knowing that you fought for something bigger than yourselves. As the 12 operators filed out of the classroom, each paused to shake Marcus's hand and thank him for lessons that went far beyond tactical training. Admiral Mitchell remained behind, watching the man who had transformed from an invisible janitor into one of the most influential teachers these operators would ever encounter. "Marcus," Admiral Mitchell said, "I have a question for you." "Yes, sir. What are you going to do now? You can't go back to being invisible after this week." Marcus smiled, thinking about the letters he had finally mailed to Carmen Santos and Susan Morrison about the healing that came from sharing stories that honored fallen teammates. "Sir, I think I'm ready to stop hiding from who I used to be. Maybe it's time for Lone Eagle to remember that eagles aren't meant to stay grounded forever." 3 months later, Marcus Thompson began working as a civilian contractor, training special operations forces and developing curriculum for cultural engagement and civilian protection. His official title was Senior Leadership Instructor, but everyone who worked with him knew him by his call sign. The invisible janitor had become a teacher whose lessons would save lives around the world. And in classrooms from Coronado to Fort Bragg, a new generation of warriors learned what it truly meant to earn their call signs through service that honored the finest traditions of American military values. Some stories end with recognition and reward. Others end with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that important lessons have been passed on to those who need them most. Marcus Thompson's story was both, but he would have said that the second ending mattered more than the first. Call signs, after all, aren't earned for personal glory. They're earned for moments when individual courage serves something larger than individual ambition. And the best call signs are the ones that inspire others to reach for the same heights of service and sacrifice. Lone Eagle had soared alone when a mission demanded it. Now he was teaching others to fly,